All right, folks, we're back on the Hoplite channel yet again. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. You have no idea. But if you're here, you clicked on the video to see currency wars. Whoops. Yep, this is where we are right now. I'm watching and listening to the news just the same as anybody else. And I'm thinking to myself, is this going to be World War III? Is it going to be the Cold War Part 2? Is it going to be a little bit of both? Or is it going to be something totally different? And I think it's going to be its own thing, but it's definitely going to resemble more of a Cold War. And right now, we are in the beginning of what appears to be a currency war between the West and the East. Right now, it's mostly between the United States and Europe together against the country of Russia. And who would have thought over a little incursion into the country of Ukraine that this would all start snowballing? Well, this is what's going on. And I wanted to do this video real quick. This will be a shorter one, so everybody breathe easier for that. But I wanted to do this video to kind of flesh out how we got here and how all of this nonsense could be avoided. And no one's asking these questions or stating these facts openly to politicians or to the media. And this is why people think we're dangerously close to World War III, is because a currency war is essentially one step removed from a full-on kinetic war. Most of these wars start out as economic wars, and then they become wars of positioning, as in moving forces closer to enemy forces, and then before you know it, just like you had in the Revolutionary War in the United States, the shot heard around the world, and then it's game on, and then it's everything, right? It's economic war, it's physical war, it's propaganda war, it's everything. And right now, we are at a position where we're not really sure how this is going to go, although we know it's leading down this road. And we got to talk about how we got here. And as an American, I'm going to say flat out, you can put most of the blame on us, because for the last 45, 50 years, we've stuck our nose into so many of these problems in the world. And for whatever reason, we feel like, number one, we have a right to do that. And number two, like, don't worry, it's us. We can solve this. And for the life of me, I don't know why we haven't just taken a break and said, yeah, Ukraine, Russia, you guys hash that out. We're gonna sit over here for a while. We just don't. But yeah, the currency war right now, this is what's going on, and everyone's going to take a beating. This is going nowhere good for the entire world. But let's talk about how we got to this position in the world and where it could possibly go. So a little timeline here so everybody can follow. 1971, the United States decides to take the US dollar off of the gold standard. For the life of me, I've been trying to find anybody who has a good answer as to why the US dollar, which had enjoyed status as the world reserve currency since the Bretton Woods Agreement, since after World War II, why we would come off the gold standard and just become fiat currency. The best answer I got was, well, we have more liquidity with a fiat currency that isn't backed by a precious metal, and we can just do what we want with it. Yeah, that's fine, and that's great, but you know, what goes up must come down. So President Nixon, right, decided to take us off the gold standard, and all of a sudden, now the U.S. is untethered to any kind of physical backing to its currency. Well, the following year, Washington, D.C., people on the Hill started to say, hey, what if no one wants the U.S. Fiat paper currency? And then people, I don't know, like when that question came up, they were like, yeah, you're right. Oh, well, what do we do now? Well, we took ourselves off the gold standard. What if the people asking that question turn out to be right and nobody wants our paper fiat? Well, Richard Nixon, in the last year of his presidency, tells, Henry Kissinger, he's like, listen, Henry, I need you to go to Saudi Arabia and work something out with the Saudis. Just make it happen. And, Henry Kissinger, being the eternal diplomat, says to Nixon, yes, Mr. Nixon, I will go and I will talk to the Saudis and we will reach an agreement. You can trust me. And so he goes to Saudi Arabia with this plan in mind. The U.S. is going to guarantee the military defense of Saudi Arabia if and only if Saudi Arabia sells the U.S. crude oil without any limitations, but more importantly, that Saudi Arabia agrees that all oil it exports will be transacted in U.S. dollars only. So Kissinger's bright idea, which was actually really bright at the time, says, well, if we can't back our dollar with gold, we'll just back it with Saudi crude. We are changing the U.S. gold-backed dollar to the petrodollar. So that's where the phrase petrodollar came from. It was between 71 and 74, the U.S. transitioned from backing its dollar from gold to essentially oil. And it wasn't even our oil, it was somebody else's oil. Yeah, how could that go wrong? Well, we'll see. 1991, we go from 74 to 91. So 6 years of the 70s was left, which was awful. Then you had the 80s in between, which was great. And then 91, the Cold War ends, Soviet Union ends, and the Russian Federation begins. And in my previous episodes on this whole catastrophe going on right now in Eastern Europe, Russia had to eat a lot of crow after the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall coming down. They lost. All the satellite nations got their sovereignty back, and Russia was just kind of like, beaten down and made fun of for the next 20 years. And they had to build themselves up. And what did the United States do in response to this? Were we gracious winners? Did we pick Russia up by the hand and say, hey, we were actually kind of pseudo-allies during World War II, so we can patch this whole thing up and we'll become, partners, and we'll help you be successful if you help us? No, we didn't. We just spent 1991 to 2019 rapidly and without being checked moving the NATO borders eastward. And that was mostly all us. I mean, of course, Europe and all the countries that were former satellite nations wanted to join, but we really were champing at the bit to get NATO membership to anybody and everybody who wanted it. Russia didn't like this, and for good reason, right? They'd lost the Cold War, but now the United States is pushing its borders essentially to the point where Russia was looking at NATO like, well, you're moving eastward the same way Germany was moving eastward in World War II. So we're going to go right back into a Cold War and maybe a hot war all over again. So between 91 and 2019, Russia may have been the laughingstock of the world and took a lot of hits on the chin, but they were definitely planning. They were making strides and they were making moves where they would not have to live this way with unchecked NATO expansion eastward. The United States now, because we've been top dog for so long, runs into a bit of a problem. Maybe you guys remember between 2020 and 2021, the world had a health crisis, right? There was this illness that was worldwide, a pandemic, if you will. And what does the United States decide to do? Well, the U.S. and all the other Western countries, because we're smart, decide to shut down our economies. We tell people, no more going to work, no more going to school, no more going to the bar, no more going to the restaurant, no more going to the hair salon. Everyone's going to stay home. Everyone's going to be locked down. But don't worry, we're going to come out with something called the Paycheck Protection Program. And we're just going to print U.S. dollars like it's going out of style. And that's what we did. Literally between 2020 and the end of 2021, the United States printed trillions of U.S. dollars, more so than any other previous period of U.S. history. So all of the U.S. dollars today in circulation, over half can be traced back to the last 2 years. If that doesn't sound nuts, I don't know what does. But how could this possibly go wrong, right? We come off the gold standard, and then 50 years later, we decide to print trillions of our paper fiat. Well, this is what happens. February 24th, over a month ago, Russia invades Ukraine to stop the NATO expansion, right? We all know that happened. Although this isn't the only reason. This is the predominant reason that Russia decided to invade Ukraine. I've been learning a lot more about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and why it's going on and all the sordid details behind it. and it goes way beyond just NATO expansion. But that's a video for a later date, and I don't think I'll get away with talking about it on this platform, so I might not make that video entirely. But Russia invades Ukraine to stop NATO expansion. The United States and Europe, what do they decide to do? Oh, we'll just sanction every sector of the Russian economy. Right. So Karl von Clausewitz, yeah, I'm sure he would approve of that. And by the way, there was somebody on a previous video I did on the series of Karl von Clausewitz. Yeah, I said von Clausewitz. I know it's von Clausewitz, but I'm an American, okay? So it's my job to mispronounce every European name I come across, and you should know that if you're an American who wrote that. That's our job. As an American, we put our foot in our mouth. Okay, so deal with it. But Karl von Clausewitz looks at this and says, okay, Russia invades Ukraine. Is Ukraine part of the United States? No. Is it part of Europe? Maybe someday, but it's not. What do you guys decide to do? You sanction almost every sector of the Russian economy in response. So you take one of your most powerful cards in your hand and you play it on the first go-round. Now what? Now what's left? Now what do you do? The UK, I want to say they sanctioned every square inch of the Russian economy they could find. The UK just said, screw it. We'll sanction anything that even looks Russian. Well, this is what happened. On April 1st, which was yesterday, this video is being filmed on the 2nd, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, said that on the 1st of this month, he said he would sign a decree that would force, by law, Russian banks and Russian gas companies to only accept payment from unfriendly nations, which would be the US and European Union. Unfriendly nations would only be able to transact Russian gas in rubles only. Uh-oh. Yeah. Now we go back to 1971. Our fiat's not backed by anything. We printed trillions of it. And now Russia is saying to the West, yeah, okay, you guys had the Petro-Dollar with the Saudis. That's cool. Good for you. Guess what we have? We have a lot of what the Saudis have. Natural gas, crude oil, and petroleum, gas. What does Europe need more than anything from Russia? Gas. Yeah. Currency wars, right? This would get really ugly really fast. And the only reason I believe Vladimir Putin just put this stipulation on gas is because it's April, okay? As we go, the weather's going to get warmer. Life is going to be easier to live in the European Union, in the northern climates even. But as summer turns into fall and fall turns into winter, do not be surprised that if Europe and the US still continue along this path of sanctioning the Russian economy, like to the hilt, they're going to say, yeah, guess what? Now crude oil has to be paid to the Russian Federation in rubles. And now natural gas has to be paid to the Russian Federation in rubles. Or you can pay us in gold. Russia has been stacking tons of gold between this period. The ruble is going to be a gold-backed security. It'll be a gold-backed note. They're going to take the ruble and move it back to where the U.S. had the U.S. dollar in 1970. So ask yourself, the United States prints trillions of dollars of paper fiat that's no longer backed by anything. It was backed by Saudi oil. Now Russia, which sits on a lot of crude oil, gas, and natural gas, is saying, yeah, that's great, but if you want what we have, it's going to be rubles. This currency war is going to hit Europe right in the mouth. They're going to take it the worst of anybody. Europe needs Russian gas. They definitely need natural gas. And even the United States, I think 25% of our palladium comes from Russia. Now, I didn't know what palladium was used for until I Googled it. You should Google it as well. It's used for a lot of things that we need. Russia is also a huge exporter of fertilizer. What do farmers need to grow crops? Fertilizer. Russia exports tons and tons of fertilizer. Wheat and grain. They export a lot of that too. If Russia does what it did on April 1st to all of these other commodities, that means everything for the world is going to get exponentially more expensive. If Russia wants, it could hammer out an agreement between itself, China, India, Brazil, and South Africa, the BRICS nations as they're known, and they could attempt to crash the US dollar. And they just might. They might crash the euro first, but they don't really care so much about crashing the euro. They know the euro can be crashed. If they can crash the US dollar by cutting out the United States and its friendly nations from all of these commodities, which are actual wealth, they're not made up, it's not paper fiat. You need oil, right? Despite what all the Greenpeace people tell you, the world still runs on crude. That is the lifeblood of the world economy. It's still petroleum, it's still crude oil, it's still gas. And all Russia is saying, hey, lift your sanctions and maybe this goes away. But if we keep up this game where we're trying to get them to blink first on these sanctions, could crash the world economy. And China, India, and Russia, those three in particular, are going to circle the wagons and they're going to trade. Russia is going to get cheap goods from China. China is going to get cheap gas from Russia. India is going to get cheap fertilizer from Russia to grow crops. If India grows crops, Russia is going to get cheap crops and cheap food sources from India, China, and all the other countries they deem friendly. So we have a currency war that will become a Cold War. And the Cold War will be based around what you're willing to spend on commodities, what you're willing to spend on precious metals, what you're willing to spend on hard assets. And this is what's so annoying about this. I mean, annoying, it's evil, is that the governments that are doing these things don't care because it doesn't affect them personally. They're all connected to the government. They're all rich. They're not going to have to wait in line and worry about gas or food being rationed. And by the way, my president, Joseph Biden, said, yeah, we talked about food shortages when he went to go to talk with the NATO allies in Poland. And he said, yeah, they're going to be real. That clip exists. It's full on. I believe at that moment he told one sentence of truth in that whole speech, and that's all we need to hear is like, yeah, food shortages are coming and they're going to be real. He's already telling you that he has no intention of backing off with these sanctions against Russia. And Russia's being reasonable right now, saying, yeah, gas payments are going to be in rubles, but you know they could do the exact same thing for all of the other exports they have. And for the life of me, I don't know why the Western governments in the United States and Europe are doing this, because they surely must know what I know. But are they willing to crash the world economy just to spite Russia? Or maybe, conspiracy theory time, maybe they know the US dollar has been off the gold standard long enough that it's on its last leg. It's not going anywhere. They know the US dollar is going to crash. Maybe they knew back in 2020 by printing trillions of dollars, they were going to crash it anyway, and this is just going to speed up its demise. What better way to let the dollar crash than to blame it on some country like Russia for doing it? Maybe the US dollar is dead and we just don't know it yet. And our government is going to use these sanctions to put the last nail in the coffin and turn around and say, the US dollar is dead, it's no longer the world reserve currency, you can thank Russia for it. But we know that's not true. We know it started a long time before, and we know there's no good reason for these sanctions and this currency war to exist except for ulterior motives. And it's the middle class that's going to take it the worst. The United States and its population, its middle class population, is going to absorb the brunt of these sanctions and this currency war. The European middle class is going to get annihilated by it. I mean, I really feel bad for Europe, because when those cold winter months come, if this is still going on, and your countries have no backup plan, which I don't know what backup plan they have, because they probably would have announced it by now. when the snow starts to fall in the winter and your gas prices are now 5-10 times more than what they were last year, as everything else will be, because shipping food is going to cost money for what shipping companies have to spend in gas and transportation. Everything is going to get more expensive. None of the people in government are going to suffer the consequences of it. It's going to be you in the middle class that's going to have to eat it. And I don't know, like, does the United States and Europe think that these sanctions are going to get the Russian population to overthrow Vladimir Putin and the government and the Kremlin? Or is it just going to make Russia dig in its heels more and understand that the United States is punishing their middle class, just the same way as Russia is going to punish our middle class on account of what our government is doing with their own sanctions? This is going nowhere good, folks. And I want to read a excerpt from On War by Karl von Clausewitz. And I think this kind of says, this should bring us back to earth. This is on page 19 under the heading, "The probabilities of real life replace the extreme and the absolute required by theory." And Commander von Clausewitz said, "Warfare thus eludes the strict theoretical requirements that extremes of force be applied. Once the extreme is no longer feared or aimed at, it becomes a matter of judgment what degree of effort should be made. And this can only be based on the phenomena of the real world and the laws of probability. Once the antagonists have ceased to be mere figments of a theory and become actual states and governments, when war is no longer a theoretical affair but a series of actions obeying its own peculiar laws, reality supplies the data from which we can deduce the unknown that lies ahead. From the enemy's character, from his institutions, the state of his affairs, and his general situation, each side, using the laws of probability, forms an estimate of its opponent's likely course and acts accordingly." Right. We have to be rational about this. If we sanction Russia, Russia will sanction us. If we sanction to this degree, Russia will meet us to that degree. If we go above, they will raise. If we raise above what they've raised, it keeps going. We cannot treat the world as though we in the United States or the West are always invading these little banana republics. Oh, we'll just ruin their economy, and then the people will rise up with torches and pitchforks, and then they'll kill or arrest or exile the guy we don't want. This is Russia we're talking about. They're a first world country. They have friends that are other first world countries. You don't just sanction them and expect nothing in return, right? The theoretical ideas of the extreme go out the window when you are in a war, a currency war, and realities take their place. And you have to treat your enemy as though he is going to make decisions that you would make if you were faced with the same things that you intend to do to him, right? Oh, if I throw a jab at my opponent, what's he going to do? Well, what'd I do? Well, I would dodge it. Okay, well then I'll throw a jab and a cross. All right, what's he going to do with the cross? Well, if he can't get out of the way in time, he'll block it or parry it. That's what I would do. That's how you have to think about these things. I don't know what the United States and Europe is thinking, but this currency war is going to be a global war, and it's going to be a war of attrition. And it's going to be who runs out of money first, whose fiat money is no longer worth the paper it's printed on. And the people who have no say over any of this are going to be the casualties. It's going to be you and me. It's going to be people living in Russia who just want to live an average, ordinary life. Their gas and everything else is going to be dirt cheap, but everything else that they would get from the rest of the Western world will become unavailable or very expensive. I think Russia is in a position where they can weather the storm better than we can. You need energy when the lights go out and the snow starts to fall. Okay? And electricity is fine when it's based on wind or nuclear or what have you, but for the majority of people on electrical grids, you need gas, and you need oil, and you need natural gas. And we're going to see how bad this could get if the US and Europe and Russia don't come to terms with the fact that this little invasion in Ukraine is now metastasizing into a much, much more bigger conflict, and it could bring the whole world into it. And if it gets bad enough, people might resort to old-fashioned war, which is, fought with bullets and bombs. And we're talking about a nuclear power as well, and nobody wants to see it go that far. But a currency war takes us one step closer to that reality, and that ain't good. Okay. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope you got something out of this. Currency wars. There are so many examples in history how currency wars and sanctions and wars of attrition on an economic scale are what eventually lead to full-fledged kinetic wars, as I said, with bombs and bullets. So we need to call this out for what it is. There are no innocent parties here, but if this goes on, innocent people are going to suffer, and it's going to be real. You're talking about possible famines. If fertilizer feeds the majority of the world and the third world requires on these fertilizer exports, you are possibly talking about mass starvation, and that's real. And those people have nothing to do with Russia, Ukraine, or NATO, and they could be caught up in this. So I want you to think about that. Anyway, I appreciate you coming by. Give this a thumbs up, a subscription. If you haven't subscribed yet and you're liking the channel, I'm going to try to crank some more of this material out as it comes to my attention. But yeah, I thought this just had to be said because this is what's going on. This is much bigger than Ukraine. It's much bigger than NATO and Russia. This is now something that's going to affect every country in the world that deals with the world economy. Okay, everybody take care. Not financial advice, but I would start saving. And I would start stocking up on things that you like to enjoy that you get at the grocery store, because I believe, and I'm not saying this is a sure thing, that grocery store shelves in the U.S. and especially Europe are going to become more bare. And you're going to see, as President Biden said, more food shortages. So I don't want to see anyone suffer on account of this. I just kind of see this storm on the horizon, and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So go out there and start stocking up on things you think you might need, because it's going to get bumpy. Okay, but till then, take it easy and take care.